Hello everyone and welcome back to an all-new Sermons in the Park. As always, I am your Reverend Jamie McCaskill. I want to take this time once again to thank you for joining me here. And I want to also take this time to send out a special welcome to all our new viewers. I want to welcome you to the family. I know there's a couple of you out there who just started watching and it means a lot to me. So thank you for joining us here today. Let's take this time as we do each and every week to thank our Heavenly Father for all the good things that He's done in our lives and for all the great things that He's done in our lives. And don't forget, there are so many things that He's done for you and for me and for those, even the ones who are not watching. I mean, think of all the times that you leave the house and you remember, hey, I forgot my keys, and you turn around and go back inside to get your keys. God might have just kept you from getting in a car accident. You know, you might walk into a store and bump into someone you haven't seen in ages. All of these things are things that God has done for you. He does these things to encourage you and to protect you. So let's take this time to thank Him, okay? Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for all of our viewers that are watching. I want to thank you for sending them into my life today. I want to thank you, Father, for all the food that you give us, the water that you provide, the nourishments that you give us. You know, Father, there are things that you are doing to us on a molecular level that we may not realize. You might, there might be a virus that comes against us, and you protect us. You stop it from getting into our system. You stop it from making us sick, and we thank you for that, Father. We thank you for all the healings that you're giving to people each and every day. We thank you for the babies that are born, animals and humans. We thank you for that. You're wonderful and loving, and you give us so very much, and we do not take the time that we need to give you those things. And we want to thank you, Father, for your Son, who you sent all those ages ago to die so that we can have this closer relationship with you. We thank you for that, Father. I thank you for those who are watching. I thank you for my wife, my kids. I thank you for those, Father. I thank you for everything that you've done for me. And I'm sure those who are watching are saying the same thing. Thank you for giving us the things that you give us and the things that you do for us. And we thank you for that, Father. Thank you for these great stories in your word that we can read and learn from, so that we don't have to learn, as my grandfather used to say, the hard way. And we thank you, Father. Amen. So, I know last week we didn't have a video, and I apologize again for that. I had things going on in my life that just had to be taken care of. But this week we are going right back to where we stopped. We're going to be reading the book of Judges. We're continuing on in the chapter 9 like we were supposed to. We're going to be going ahead and reading and reviewing chapter 9. For those of you who usually do not watch, what we do here is we take a book from the Bible, and we do it chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and we read it and we review it. And like I said, this week we're in Judges chapter 9, and we're going to right now you're catching us in the middle of chapter 9. So if you have not seen it yet, I tell you now, go ahead and pause this video, go find part 1 and read and listen to that one, and that way you can continue and know where we are. We stopped last night just as Jotham had ran away and hid. Remember, like I said, he gave his he gave his word. He told his fable, and then he just booked it out of there. He just took off and ran right on to Beer, where he hid. So let's go ahead and pick up right where we left off. We're going to be we're not going to read the whole chapter this week. We're just going to start where we left off, which was chapter 9, verse 22. We're going to read all the rest of it, all the way to 57. Verse 22. When Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, which was Gideon, might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech, their brother, who slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in the killing of his brethren. And the men of Shechem set liers in wait for him at the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along that way by them. And it was told to Abimelech. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brethren, and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. They went out into the fields and gathered their vineyards, and trode the grapes, and made merry, and went into the house of their God, and did eat and drink, and cursed Abimelech. And Gaal the son of Ebed said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor the father of Shechem, for why should we serve him? And would to God his people were under my hand. Then would I remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, Increase thine army, and come out. And when Zebul the ruler of the city heard the words of Gaal the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. And he sent messengers unto Abimelech privily, saying, Behold, Gaal the son of Ebed and his brethren be come to Shechem, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. Now therefore up by night, thou and thy people that is with thee, and lie in wait in the fields. And it shall be that in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, thou shalt rise early, and set upon the city. And behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee, thou mayest do to them as thou shalt find occasion. And Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him by night, and they laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. And Gaal the son of Ebed went out, and stood in the entering of the gate of the city. And Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains. And Zebul said unto him, Thou seest the shadow of the mountains, and as if they were men. And Gaal spake again, and said, See, there come people down by the middle of the land, and another company come along by the plain of Meonim. Then said Zebul unto him, Where is now thy mouth, wherewith thou saidst, Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Is not this the people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray thee, and fight with them. And Gaal went out before the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many were overthrown and wounded, even into the entering of the gate. And Abimelech dealt with Arumah, and Zebul thrust out Gaal and his brethren, that they should not dwell in Shechem. And it came to pass on the morrow that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. And he took the people and divided them into 3 companies, and laid wait in the field, and looked, and behold, the people were come forth out of the city, and he rose against them and smote them. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, and stood in the entering of the gate of the city. And the 2 other companies ran upon all the people that were in the fields, and slew them. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city, and slew the people that were therein, and beat down the city, and sowed it with salt. Keep that in mind, because that's going to be important later, okay? And when all the men in the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into and hold of the house of God Berith. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered there together. And Abimelech gat him up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people that were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand, and cut down the bow from the trees, and took it, and laid it on his shoulder, and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste, do as I have done. All the people likewise cut down every man his bow, and followed Abimelech, and put them to the hold, and set the hold on fire upon them, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. Then went Abimelech to Thebes, and encamped against Thebes, and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and thither fled all the men and women, and all they of the city, and shut it to them, and gat them up to the top of the tower. And Abimelech came unto the tower, and fought against it, went hard unto the door of the tower to burn it with fire. And a certain woman cast a piece of millstone upon Abimelech's head, and all to break his skull. Then he called hastily unto the young man his armor-bearer, and said unto him, Draw the sword, and slay me, that man say not of me, a woman slew him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man into his place. And God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, which he did unto his father, in slaying his 70 brethren. And all the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So this is what we do. Like I said, if you haven't watched before, and if you didn't go back and rewatch the previous one, we take each verse and we do it. So we're going to be looking first right now at verse 22. So go ahead and let's reread that one. When Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel. This is something interesting here. The word reigned is more like, it's not like the reign of a king, okay? It's more like the reign of a prince or a commander, not a king. This shows us that the author who wrote this did not even dignify Abimelech with the verb that is used for a king's reign. Because remember, God had not anointed him to be king, had he? No. Remember, the last one we read 2 weeks ago, we discussed how Abimelech was the son of Gideon. Remember that? He was the son of Gideon and this servant girl, okay? And Abimelech then, he killed his other brothers, 70 of them. 69 because you can't count Jotham because he's still alive. We see here that now we pick up, 3 years later, okay? 3 years into his reign. So let's move on. Let's go on ahead to verse 23. Then God sent an evil spirit against Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. So what does it say? It says God sent an evil spirit. Now, these evil spirits would of course be what? They would be jealousy, distrust, and hate. Now, I do want to make sure that you understand that the word evil here is not evil like what you and I would think. This evil is more like chaos. Not really evil in the good and evil way, just evil more like chaos, okay? So God allowed these spirits, and the reason he did it is because of idolatry and mass murder. It was either an evil spirit, or maybe a demon of Satan, or it could have just been an attitude. By that I mean strife, okay? Strife that God sent between these two factions. This is similar to what we see sin against Saul, okay? Let's go ahead and look at that. 1 Samuel 16. Sorry, my phone is being extremely slow. I think it's this rain. 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 all the way to... So we'll read 14, 15, and 16. It did it again. 1 Samuel 16, 14, 15, 16. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants, which are before thee, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on a harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. Now remember, we saw Jotham proclaim that this is going to happen. He said it. He straight out said, this is going to happen. Yes, God heard him, and God saw it. He saw it all. And now he's bringing all this stuff about, isn't he? You see, Abimelech and the very same men, these are the same people that had paid him, given him the money. They put him in power. And now they're dealing with each other treacherously. They're dealing with him, and he's dealing with them. And this is all because of what they had done. Now, don't forget that. They're the ones that they gave him the money to pay for the murder of his brothers, and then when he did it, they put him in power. So let's move on. Verse 24. That the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon, might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech, their brother, who slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in the killing of his brethren. You see, this is saying that the vengeance will come, that vengeance will come on those who did it. The ones who committed this evil crime. The vengeance has come. So things were put into place to make sure that this would happen. It says, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech, their brother, who slew them. It's like a credit, right? It was all his bill, He put all this on his bill, and now it's time to pay it. The verse also says, and upon the men of Shechem who aided him in killing his brethren. Now remember, like I said, the men of Shechem, they gave him the money to pay the men to do it. And as we discussed earlier, they had probably encouraged him to do it, right? And the assassins, we can guess here, they were also from Shechem, because who else would he have gone to? These men that he hired were most likely known as ruthless, cunning killers. We can also see that the people of Shechem, they did not want to be considered guilty for these murders. No, they didn't. They wanted to put it all on him. They wanted to point their fingers and say it was all him. He did it. He hired these assassins, but don't forget, they gave him the money. They encouraged him, right? So let's move on to verse 25. And the men of Shechem set liers in wait for him in the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along that way by them, and it was told Abimelech. Now the mountains, if you remember, we discussed, the mountains are Ebal and Gerizim. Sorry, I'm horrible with these names. Gerizim. It was through them that Abimelech, this is where he would have passed through, okay, when he was coming and going, among his kingdom. So they sat there and they waited for him. They wanted to kill him. Either that or maybe capture him. We don't know. It says, and they robbed all that came along that way by them. So not only Abimelech. No, it says all. So that would be anyone who would have came through that way. And by doing this, they're showing what? They're showing contempt for him being the governor, right? Well, the king. Also, they were not under his rule, right? They're doing this as a way of saying, we're not under your rule. And since they felt that no one was governing them, they did whatever they wanted to do. Now, I saw where some people believe that they did this to encourage people, from his violence, I also saw where some people believe that this was like a civil war. This part can be confusing, but I will try to explain what I believe. It says, and it was told Abimelech. Now, I think this means that he was told that this was happening so that he kept them from catching him. Okay? This was all done just as a way to defame him, right? They essentially made the roads around Shechem unsafe to be traveled, and word had, of course, came to his ear, right? In hopes that he would come back and check on the matter. They wanted him to come back. They wanted to be called. They wanted him to come there and so they could attack him. They wanted to seize him, okay? In the next few verses, we're going to be reading about their failed coup. Okay? But just think about, what they're doing. And we can kind of see that today, where people aren't happy with the government, so they'll riot. And that's what we're seeing here. So just keep that in mind. So let's move on. Let's look at verse 26. And this one's actually interesting. So let's look at it. And Gaul, the son of Ebed, came with his brethren and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. Now, who is Gaul? Where did he come from? What is this place that he, quote unquote, went over? We do not know. We're never told, are we? There are some that believe that he was a Gentile. Now, in what we read, here, it's believed that he was a descendant of Hamor, who was a prince of Shechem during the time of Jacob. And the Canaanites, they had been exiled. His family had retired to some wherever, distant land. So when Gaul, he heard about all this trouble between Abimelech and the Shechemites, he came there with some of his family, probably over Jordan, and they tried to take advantage of it. Look what we read here in this verse. It says, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So they told him how they felt about Abimelech and what they had planned. So he of course would assure them that he's going to help them in their plans and defend them. We see that they depended on him. And because of this, they were secure, about their business and their farming. Because like I said, we get very, very little information on him. We don't know that much about Gaul. He's unknown to us. We only see that, he came forward and he led the people. He led them against Abimelech, and that the people of Shechem, they put their confidence in him. So let's move on. Let's look at verse 27. They went out into the fields and gathered their vineyards and trode the grapes and made merry and went into the house of their God and did eat and drink and cursed Abimelech. So we can see from this that before the men of Shechem had stayed inside their gates, right? They didn't leave the city to gather their grapes because they were terrified. They're afraid of Abimelech. Now remember, they had been robbing and trying to kill Abimelech, and he found out about it. So of course, he gathered himself an army and he probably started to attack them, right? But now that Gaul is here watching over them, they feel a little bit more secure. It says, and trode the grapes and made merry. So things were, back to normal. It was back to business as usual. They were singing, they were dancing, they're gathering their fruits, they're treading on the winepress like we see. Let's look at something similar. Look at Isaiah chapter 16, verse 10. And gladness is taken away, and joy out of the plentiful field, and in the vineyards there shall be no singing, neither shall there be shouting. The treaders shall tread out no wine in their presses. I have made their vintage shouting to cease. So, and of course, like I said, it's possible that the merrymaking that we're seeing here, that they're making this towards their idol, as they're praising him for their vintage, which was honestly due to only one, and that was the one true God. And think what we see after this. And I think it proves it. You see, it says, and they went into the house of their God, little g, O-D, their God. This, of course, is speaking about the temple of what? Baal-berith. That way, we saw mentioned earlier in this chapter. It also says, and did eat and drink. So they were eating and they were drinking. They must have been doing this in the temple because of how it's mentioned here. They brought their first fruits, right? They're rejoicing, they're making merry right there in the temple, like idolaters did back then. It says also, and cursed Abimelech. So they were cursing Abimelech. They were wishing they had never knew him. They wanted to be rid of him, right? They wanted him to meet some deserving end. And here they are doing this in the temple that they took that money from to pay for him to get that throne. Man, how times have changed, am I right? In short, we read that the men had gathered the grapes, they made their wine, and they're having a drunken party, and they're worshiping Baal in his temple, and they're cursing Abimelech in the same temple. the same temple they would have gotten the money from for him to pay his brother's murder. Think about that. That's horrible. All right, let's go on to verse 28. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is not he the son of Jerubbaal, and Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for why should we serve him? This is just following along right after that last verse. He is talking to them during this party, right? He's asking them, Who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Well, we know who Abimelech is. We also see mention of Shechem, who was once the prince of this town, but had, of course, long ago been deposed, hadn't he? It's kind of a way of asking, which one's better, right? Was one of them better than the other? We still see that today when we're dealing with here in America with like presidents, where we'll be like, well, that one was better than this one. It's kind of the same thing. But also, if Shechem had any descendants, right, they would have had a better claim to that title. Now, notice what he asks. Is not he the son of Jerubbaal? Which, like I said, we know that's Gideon. That's Gideon's name that means against Baal. The name that he earned, right, when he threw down that altar of Baal. Then the verse goes on. And Zebul, his officer. Well, Zebul was the name, he's the man that Abimelech, Zebul is the name of the man that Abimelech had left in charge of the city, okay? Instead of ruling over them himself, he set this man over them, right? Kind of like a mayor or a vice president, if you will. In a sense, he's ruling over them like a tyrant. He's oppressing them. It says, Serve the men of Hamor. For why should we serve him? So he's saying, wouldn't you rather serve them than serve him? He's speaking in a contemptuous way about the government, right? He's preferring the descendants of Hamor, who was an old Canaanite prince that had ruled this place at some point. Now, if it is true that Gaal is a descendant of Hamor, then he's speaking in earnest here, right? He felt this was a good opportunity to get that throne back for his family. Just think about it. He's here in the temple of a religion that his people had established. Because remember, this was the temple that was there before the Israelites would. If Israel had taken the one, why not the other? I saw where some believe that in this verse, when he's speaking of Shechem, he's speaking of Abimelech because he was their representative. Now, Gaal is so puffed up with pride, right? He believes that he can overpower Abimelech, that he can take that throne for himself. I mean, sure, some of the people had agreed to follow him, right? And if you think about it, by sitting there in that temple of Baal and calling Abimelech the son of Jerubbaal, who was of Manasseh, he's trying to turn these people against him, against Abimelech. He's using that old rivalry between Manasseh and Ephraim that we spoke of earlier to start a new battle. He's saying, hey, Abimelech is the tribe of Manasseh. Zebul is his officer. What right does he have to rule over you? And then he claims the rights of Hamor, who had founded that city. Smart, right? So let's move on to verse 29. And would to God this people were under my hand, then would I remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, Increase thine army and come out. Now notice that he starts off by saying, If I were ruler of this city and general of its armies. Remember what I just said, okay? The verse says, Then would I remove Abimelech. He's talking about removing him from office. taking away the throne, taking away his kingship, driving him out of the city, out of the country, out of the world. Am I right? Then we see something interesting here. It says, and he said to Abimelech. Now, as far as we know, Abimelech is not there. Right? I mean, when we keep going, it's pretty obvious he's not there. So I think what we're seeing here, I think this is like what we see in movies, right? Where the hero is like, come out at the party, Or maybe he said it to an officer that was there to represent Abimelech. Or maybe he sent a messenger. I don't know. He told him, increase thine army and come out. Maybe he was challenging him to come out and to meet him in an open field. Telling him to bring all the forces that you need, He doesn't doubt that he's a match for the man. You see, Gaul, I'm pretty sure the people seeing Gaul like this, it makes them see that he's brave, right? He's unafraid. He's not scared of Jared. He's not scared of Abimelech. No. I think he's doing this just for that reason. He's trying to get the people to make him the ruler. He's there bragging. He's bragging. Oh, man, I can defeat Abimelech, Let's go on to verse 30. And when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaul, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. Remember, Abimelech put Zebul in office. He put him in charge of these people. So we see that he's hearing all of this, right? It says the words of Gaul, the son of Ebed, his anger was kindled. Why? Because Gaul had spoken of him. I wouldn't doubt that maybe he was on the side of the Shechemites. Okay? Maybe or maybe he was pretending to be. I don't know. But now he's angry. He's angry at Gaul. He's determined to side with Abimelech now. So he let him know he lets Abimelech know what's happening here. Look as we read on. Go to verse 30 now. 31, I'm sorry. And he sent messengers unto Abimelech privily, saying, behold, Gaul the son of Ebed and his brethren be come to Shechem, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. It says right there, privily. He did it in secret. He did it in a way so Gaul and his men didn't know he did it. He was still pretending to have the best interests of the people in mind, and probably pretending to like Gaul. I really think he did. You'll see why later. I really think he pretended like he liked Gaul, even though he was angry with him. You will see later, like I said, that he's acting private. He's acting friendly to Gaul. We read what he says here. It says, saying, Gaul, the son of Ebal, and his brethren be come to Shechem. These must have been of the family, that Abimelech knew. If they were from Canaan, he would have known what they were up to, okay? The verse says, and behold, they fortify the city against thee. Fortify. They're repairing the old fortifications. Or maybe they just added something new to it. I have no idea. Maybe they besieged it. And by that I mean they placed armies around it so that no one could come in or out. Some even have taken this to be him telling Abimelech that he turned the inhabitants against him. And that's possible too. Because, we were seeing that happen. Zebul was very sneaky. Am I right? He somehow knew how to get this message to Abimelech, and privately, warning him that they had fortified the city against him. He was a pretty smart guy. Read on. Let's go to verse 32 and see what that says. Now therefore up by night, thou and the people that is with thee, and lie in wait in the field. He's telling him there's no time to wait. You need to do this now. You need to come on. You need to get here. He says, and the people that is with thee, talking about the troops, the ones that he gathered, the ones that were with him. Not only his guards, no. All that he had. And now that he has the intelligence now that he knows of this revolt, it says, and lie in wait in the fields. He felt that it would be smart that he should march with everyone that he had that very night. Right then, as soon as he got this message, he should come on. And he's do it so that he's not discovered, that he's not seen. And he should wait there in the fields until it's morning time, and then attack the city while they're unaware, surprising them. Okay? Now, let's look at verse 33. And it shall be that in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, thou shalt rise early, set upon the city. Behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee, then mayest thou do to them as thou shalt find occasion. You see, it's saying that by marching there at night, he would be able to attack the city at sunrise, before the people have time, before they can defend against it, surprising them. The verse says, and behold, when he and the people that is with him come out against thee. This is talking about Gaul and his men, okay? All the ones that were with him, and the men that, the ones that he brought with him as well. The verse says, thou mayest do to them as thou shalt find occasion. Telling him to do whatever you need to do. I mean, he will see what he needs to do. Now notice that Zebul does not even pretend to advise him any further than that. No, he leaves all that planning up to Abimelech, okay? All he advises him to do is to come out there and hide somewhere near the city at nighttime so that he can attack it in the morning. You see, he's assuming that Gaul will leave that city in the morning to fight Abimelech, isn't he? So, let's move on to verse 34 now. And Abimelech rose up, and all the people that were with him by night, and they laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. In 4 companies. Abimelech takes the advice of Zebul, doesn't he? It says, and laid wait against Shechem in 4 companies. 4 companies. So he divided all of those men that he had with him into 4 groups, and he placed them at the 4 corners of the city. And we can assume that at some great distance as well, right? That way they could wait for that prime opportunity, a way to get into the city. This is smart. This is real smart. Abimelech is listening to his governor here. He's scattering his men into 4 groups surrounding that city. Smart. Smart. Let's go to verse 35 now. And Gaul the son of Ebed went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him, from lying in wait. So Gaul woke up early, which, that makes sense. He is a man of vigilance, and he's very active. This also shows us that he's intelligent as well. He must have known something of Abimelech, but of course he did not know he was out there waiting on him, though. It tells us that it says, and stood in the entering of the gate of the city. So he just walked, he was looking out, either maybe he was trying to see if there was a guard on duty or something, or to see if there was any danger coming. It tells us that, and Abimelech rose up, and the people that were with him from lying in wait. So just as Gaul was at the gate, right, Abimelech and his men, they come out, they're ready to ambush. Okay, so let's move on. Let's continue. Verse 36 now. And when Gaul saw the people, he said to Zebul, behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains. And Zebul said to him, thou seest the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. Okay. What do we get here? Well, Zebul, he must have been up early as well. And maybe he come down to the gate just to see how things are going, right? He probably wanted to see if Abimelech and his forces had opportunity to get in, or maybe he planned on letting them in. I don't know. Either way, it appears that he came out there and he stood with Gaul, making it friendly, And Abimelech says to him, behold, there come people down from the tops of the mountains. Notice that it says mountains, plural. That means that it was Ebal and Gerizim. Both of them are near Shechem, right? Then we see, and Zebul said unto him, thou seest the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. Now, this could be one of two things. All right? Seest the shadow. Either he was making fun of him, which honestly, I'm going to be honest, I like to think that he was. Or maybe he just out of bed, and he's having trouble seeing, maybe he's wiping his eyes, and he's tired, and he couldn't make out that it was men. It also could be that he was afraid. It also could be that, he's acting serious to deceive him. Keep in mind, he's trying to keep him talking, letting Abimelech get closer. Now, slowing Gaul's, he's doing this as a way of kind of slowing Gaul's preparedness, okay? It shows us that he did not know Abimelech was coming, because he is Gaul. Okay, I should say, here is Gaul. And he's standing there in the open gate, and he sees these men approaching, right? And Zebul is trying to tell him, oh, it's not men you see coming, Now, let's go on to verse 37. And Gaul spake again, said, see, there come people down by the middle of the land, and another company come among the plain of Meonim. Now, this is something that you do not hear about very often. So, I'm going to give you a little something here. The plain of Meonim, this is an old superstition. And it was a place where mystical ceremonies were done, and soothsayers would gather there and do soothsaying. Notice, Gaul is now seeing that the men are separated into companies, that they've surrounded the city. Just notice that. Okay, on to verse 38 here. Then said Zebul unto him, where is now thy mouth, wherewith thou sayest, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? Is not this the people that thou hast despised? Go out, I pray now, and fight with them. He just couldn't hold back anymore. No. He couldn't. He just had to take this opportunity to dig into him, right? Look what he says there. It says, where is now thy mouth, wherewith thou sayest, who is Abimelech, that we should serve him? He's saying, I dare you. Say something now. He's right there. Say something to him. Where's all that boasting now? Where's all that bragging? he hadn't been bragging earlier about how, he's not bragging now, but he had been bragging earlier about how he would just take the city from him, right? He says, is not this the people thou hast despised? Remember, he said he wanted Abimelech. He said, increase your army, right? Come out, fight. He's telling him, go out, I pray you now, and fight with them. Show me how big of a man you are. Show us you aren't just some bragger, right? Show us you're not just talking. He's telling Gaul, go out there and meet him in the field, like you said you would. He's reminding him of all of that proud talk. If what you said is true, show me, right? I love that, man. That's one of my favorite parts in this chapter. All right, let's go on. Verse 39 now. And Gaul went out before the man of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. So Gaul actually rode out there. He rode out there before his army. He was ready to meet him. He was ready to meet Abimelech. Abimelech had gathered all of these men together. He put them all in order. It says that he fought with Abimelech. He met him and he fought with him somewhere outside of the city, okay? Now let's go on to verse 40. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many were overthrown and wounded, even unto the entering of the gate. Now, Abimelech was the better man in this battle. He let him run, and he gave him chase. It says, and many were overthrown and wounded, even unto the entering of the gate. Now, the Targum actually says slain. I want to point that out. The Targum literally says slain. Now, many lay dead and wounded from this battle, all the way back to the city of the city gates. That's what it says here. And they had tried, because they tried to run. They tried to flee. Now, Gaul did just as Zebul had told him to do. Abimelech was ready for him. His men tried to flee. All the ones that he did not kill or wound had fled back into the city gates. Let's go on to verse. Let's look at what we see in verse 41 here. And Abimelech dwelt at Arumah, and Zebul thrust out Gaul and his brethren, that they should not dwell in Shechem. The city was Arumah, right? This was called that because of Arumah and Jerome. They tell us that it was in their time. The city of Arumah was also called Arima. Jerome tells us that in his time it was called Ramphithis, and it's apparently not far from Shechem. This was probably where he was when he received the message, okay? He was content with that, the advantage that he had gotten, and he decided to just, wait for another opportunity to present itself. And it did. We see it say, and Zebul thrust out Gaul and his brethren, and that they should not dwell in Shechem. We can gather that there must have been two groups of people in Shechem. Ones that hated Abimelech, and the other that was, more friendly towards him. And after this embarrassing loss, Zebul was able to gather the people and drive Gaul and his brethren out. He didn't have the strength to put him to death, right? And he couldn't give him to Abimelech. They were defeated. So it wouldn't have been that hard to convince the people to toss him out after what they just witnessed. I mean, he did run, right? So let's look at verse 42. It came to pass on the morrow that the people went out into the field, and they told Abimelech. On the morrow. That means the daytime. After that battle, look where it says that the people went out into the field. Now, I read where some people think that this was talking about going out to the fight, to start another battle. It just doesn't seem likely. I think this is them heading out there to collect their grapes from the vine, and that's what Josephus tells us as well. Or maybe they went out to till the fields, right? It just seems to say that it was right after the battle, okay? Maybe they felt more secure to do it since, Abimelech and his men had left. Maybe they felt that they won't come back. At least not for a little while. Then we see, and they told Abimelech. I honestly think that this is just wording in a weird way for us modern people. I think what it means is that it was told to Abimelech that the people had come out into the field, and that this is a good opportunity to just cut them down. They're unarmed. They're out here in the field. Okay? That's what I think. So let's move on to verse 43. And he took the people and divided them into 3 companies, and laid wait in the field, and looked, and behold, the people were come forth out of the city, and he rose up against them and smote them. So the people he took would be the forces that he had with him, okay, in Arumah. He took them and said, hey, and he divided them into 3 companies. Each one of the companies would have their own commander, of course. It says that he laid wait in the field. So he went back to that field, one company in one part of the field, one in another part, right? The verse says, and it looked, and behold, the people were come forth out of the city. So he saw them. He saw them when they were coming out of the city. It says, and rose up against them and smote them. So the armies then ambushed them from each side as they came out in the field, killing them. I can kind of see them, in my mind's eye, I see them just slowly coming out. They're checking, and when they didn't see Abimelech, they come rushing towards the city. you know. They thought the war was over, right? I mean, Abimelech had been gone. So they went on and they did their normal jobs in the fields. And of course, there's Abimelech out there waiting on them, and he attacks them, kills them. The verse says smote. You know. All right, let's look at verse 44 now. And Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, stood in the entering of the gate of the city, and the two other companies ran upon all the people that were in the fields and slew them. So Abimelech, he took his men, the ones that were under his charge. They were probably, if you honestly think about it, they would have probably been the best of them. You know, the Septuagint makes it clear, because it calls them princes, right? So we see that it says, rushed forward and stood in the entering of the gate. He did this, I think, you know, to keep the people who were in the field from being able to return home, to be able to return to the city. And it also keeps the people who are in the city from coming out and helping them. The verse then goes on, and the two other companies ran upon all the people that were in the field and slew them. This shows us that these people, they had no hope. There was no escaping. You know, they were going to be killed. Verse 45 now. And Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he took the city and slew the people that were therein, and beat down the city and sowed it with salt. Look what he did. He sowed it with salt. He polluted it. The soil there, this place was permanently bare now. I'm serious. Look at Deuteronomy 29:23. Deuteronomy 29:23. And that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is now not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass groweth there, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath. Also, look at Jeremiah 17:6. For he shall be like the heath in the desert, and shall not see when good cometh, but shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, in a salt land, and not inhabited. This actually is later nullified when Jeroboam rebuilds the city and makes it his capital in about 930 to 910 BC. We see this in 1 Kings 12:25. Jeroboam built Shechem and Mount Ephraim, and dwelt therein, and went out from thence, and built Penuel. You see, if you sow with salt, what you're essentially doing is you're making that in that fertile ground, because this was a very fertile country. You probably could gather that from as we were reading, but you're now making it infertile. It is literally a symbol of desolation. Okay, Shechem would not be rebuilt for 150 years. What we see is that after he kills all those men that were working that field, he went into that city and he kills everyone there. And then he tears down everything that stood there, and he sowed it with salt. He killed all the plants, all the vegetation, anything that was alive, he killed it. And he made sure nothing could come back there, at least for, like I said, 150 years. He was the anger of this man, right? So let's go on to verse 46. And when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into the hold of the house of the god Berith. So they heard what happened in Shechem. They heard that that Jeroboam that he come there, and he took that Abimelech came there and took it. that he killed all the people that were in the city, that the city was destroyed. Not only that, but that he salted the ground. Am I right? Strangely, we see that the tower that they entered into, it must have been in the city, right? Or I should say, it must not have been in the city, because otherwise they would have seen it with their own eyes and not just, as the verse says, heard about it. It must have been not too far away, though. So it must have belonged to Shechem, and most of the important people had fled there for safety. Could this have been what we heard about earlier, this house of Milo? You know, I mean, that makes sense, right? We're now seeing that part of Jotham's curse had come to pass. It happened. It says that these men, they entered the tower. They entered into a hold of the house of the god Berith. They did not feel that they were safe in the tower, so they ran to this temple of this false god, this made-up thing, Baal Berith. This would have been, like I said, a very strong, very fortified place. Most temples were back then. Okay, maybe they felt that the sanctity of the place would protect them, right? They thought that surely Abimelech is not going to destroy this. I mean, it was the place where he got all his money to become king, right? So, let's look at verse 47 now. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So we see that Abimelech must have had spies everywhere, right? Because, I mean, he knows about this. I mean, who could have been the one that was watching the men of this tower? I mean, it tells us all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. They were all there. They were all held up in this temple of Baal Berith. Remember, this is where they were, all hiding, thinking that being there would keep them safe from Abimelech. But we see that he finds out. He finds out where they all are. You know, we'll be reading here in a second, right? What he does. Let's go on. Moving on to verse 48 now. And Abimelech got him up to Mount Zalmon, he and the people that were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bow from the trees and took it and laid it on his shoulder and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste, do as I have done. Now the mountain here, Zalmon, it's near Shechem, okay? It's thought to be the same one that we see called Salmon in Psalms. Turn to Psalm 68:14. With the Almighty scattered kings in it, it was white as snow in Zalmon. It's believed that it got its name from the color of the trees that grew there, okay? It's the verse again says, he and all the people that were with him. This, of course, is that whole army, right? The verse goes on. Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bow from the trees. Now, I need you to bear with me here. These trees that grew on Mount Zalmon, he took this tree, it says, and took it and laid it on his shoulder. So it would have actually been a limb from that tree. And he carried it along with him on his shoulders. It says, and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done. He's telling them to take an axe, cut a limb from this tree, lay it on their shoulders. Mount Zalmon was a very heavily wooded area. He must have been strong to have cut down these limbs from these trees and just carried them to wherever this tower was. Because he's telling his men to do the same thing. They must have carried a lot of wood with them to do what they're about to do. Verse 49 now. And all the people likewise cut down each man his bow followed Abimelech, put them to the hold, and set the hold on fire upon them, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. So they had all of his men had tree limbs on their shoulders. They must have looked like trees as they were making their way back to the temple. It says that they put them to the hold and set the hold on fire upon them. What we can gather from this is that this hold, it had to have been made out of wood, because it was easily set. They set it on fire really easily. I read where one historian actually said that it was easier. It was either made out of wood, or it was the forest itself. And that they just took these trees and they bent them and they tied them together and divided them, making up a kind of a fence. But really, why would you leave a tower for a shelter like that, right? Anyway, the verse says, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also. So they burned up this hold. The Vulgate actually adds saying with fire and smoke. So they gathered this wood there, and they set that wood on fire. Now, these trees, they would have been freshly cut down. Have you ever tried to light freshly cut wood? It was almost impossible. It wouldn't have burned very easily, but they would put off a lot of it would put off a lot of smoke, and it would have suffocated anyone who was inside. Josephus says that they actually gathered dry wood. Now, but we cannot account for that, because the story makes it clear. I mean, it's very clear that he cut this down. This had to have been fresh green trees. Let's not forget that Josephus is writing a long time after all this. We read of the deaths here saying, and 1,000 men and women. Josephus, though, again, but he actually says a lot more. He says many, many more. He says 1,500 men, and the rest were a great multitude. This literally fulfills the curse of Jotham. Right here, what we're reading. This fulfills that curse. So, let's go on to verse 50 now. Then went Abimelech to Thebes, and encamped against Thebes, and took it. Now, I read where one historian said that Thebes had actually rebelled against Abimelech. It was not far from Shechem, okay? Now, another historian said that the ruins that he believes were Thebes was about 1 furlong from Shechem. To the left of Jacob's, well, there are ruins of a large town, marble, whole pillars, and other signs that there was large palaces. Also, the soil is very fruitful there. Okay? Jerome says that in his time, there was a small village called Thebes, and it was on the border of Shechem, about 13 miles from it. Realize that's a rough estimate. It has to be near Shechem, though, and it has to be inhabited by Shechemites for it to fulfill a curse of Jotham. Okay? It says, and encamped against Thebes and took it. It's very easy to think that it must have been east for them to take it, as it probably deserted by its inhabitants who had probably fled to that tower. Okay? Moving on. Verse 51. But there was a strong tower within the city, and thither fled all the men and women, and all they of the city, and shut it to them, and gat them up to the top of the tower. Now remember, the tower of Shechem, well, it wasn't in the city, was it? It was on the outside. This tower, the Tower of Thebes, is inside the city, like they generally are. It says, and thither fled all the men and women, and all they of the city. All of them. The men, the women, the children, all of them. The maidservants, it didn't matter. All of them. This must have been one huge tower to hold everyone. It would not have had rooms, right? It was probably just a large area, and then battlements were at the top of it, so that they all ran inside, and it says, and shut it to them. So they shut the gates. These would have been strong, they would have been barred, they would have been bolted, they would have kept any enemy out. It then says, and gat them up to the top of the tower. So all of them went up there, and they were watching Abimelech. They're trying to see, what's he doing? Probably annoying him, sticking their tongue out, all that. They probably had stones, things like that, tossing it down, right? So, moving on. Verse 52 now. Abimelech came into the tower, fought against it, and went hard upon the door of the tower to burn it with fire. So he went up to the tower with his army, right, ready to besiege it. The verse says, and fought against it. So he would have used everything that he knew. He's trying to get them to surrender. He's probably yelling out at them, give up. Well, the verse says, and went hard unto the door of the tower to burn it with fire. Now, the tower seems to have been built of stone. So the door was probably the only part that he would have been able to set on fire. And nothing more. Nothing more was meant by that. I know I've heard a lot of people say otherwise, but I don't think there was anything else meant by that. When it says, went hard at the door, okay? He got to the door, and he was ready to set it on fire. And he was being there, so he put himself in harm's way, didn't he? He had seen how well this worked in Balberith, and he thought he would just try it again. This happens. All kind of generals. They were just trying to, they just wanted to get inside. Now, before we move forward, I want you to remember something. For a warrior to be killed by a woman, during this time period, it was considered a disgrace. And to add to that disgrace, look what he was killed with. A piece of millstone. Something that was used to make food. A household instrument, if you will. That would be like you getting killed, like you killing a soldier with a pot. He tried covering it up by doing what? He tried to have his servant, his armor bearer. He tried to have him finish him off. But remember, we're reading about it now. That truth is known. All right, on to verse 53 now. And a certain woman cast a piece of millstone upon his head, upon Abimelech's head, and all to break his skull. Now, the upper millstone, which is what we're reading about here, because that's what she would have been using, according to Jewish scholars, they were up there casting rocks down at him, And this woman saw Abimelech's, and she saw him run towards the door. So she took a piece of this millstone, which I'm guessing must have been broken because these things are huge, and she threw it down at him. It says that she cast it upon his head, and all to break his skull. She did it for this reason, right? That's what it says. Even though it says that it broke his skull, it honestly probably just meant fractured, and because that is a mortal wound. It's righteous retaliation is what it is. He slayed his brother on one stone, and he died of a stone. She picked up this piece of millstone, threw it over the side of the tower, onto his head, as a way to keep him from getting into that door. Right? Verse 54 now. He called hastily upon the young man, his armor-bearer, and said unto him, Draw thy sword, and slay me, that men say not of me, A woman slew him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. So Abimelech knew that this was a mortal blow. Right? He knew he was going to die. And that it was because of this woman who had thrown this stone onto his head. Maybe she yelled out at him. Make sure he knew, right? So he's quick, and he calls to the young man that was with him and said unto him, Draw thy sword and slay me, that men say not of me, a woman slew him. It was embarrassing to him. It was considered unmanly to die at the hands of a woman, especially if you were a king or a general. So he didn't want to have this happen. He wanted to avoid this, right? So instead of, and it was also shameful to commit suicide, so he didn't do that. That's unforgivable. And will just add to his sins. So he calls to this young armor bearer and asks him to kill him with a sword, so that he would not have died to the hands of a woman. Amen. So, on to verse 55 now. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed every man into his place. So these men of Israel, the army, of course, remember they were Israelites. I want you have to keep that in your mind, that these are Israelites we're reading about here. And it says that they departed each man his place. So they just stopped fighting, turned around, and went home. Thebes escaped the vengeance of Abimelech. Right? Just imagine that. They all are charged. Their captain drops dead. They all just think, oh well, time to head home, and walk away. That's the way this verse makes it sound. And the Bible is truth. So if it says that they all just dropped their swords and walked away, they all just dropped their swords and walked away. Verse 56 now. Thus God rendered the wickedness of Abimelech, which he did unto his father, in slaying his 70 brethren. So he had, Abimelech had disgraced his father's family. And he had hurt his father's family, hadn't he? You know? He slayed his 70 brethren, as the verse says. Well, again, all but one. So 69. But still, this was a great wickedness that he had done. And to pay it back, the shedding of that blood requires the shedding of blood. Righteous judgment. That's what God rendered on him. This verse here and the next one contain the remarks made by the writer, okay? And we've discussed this in the past, but if you haven't seen it, I believe the writer of Judges was Samuel. This death was punishment by God for what he had done, for killing his brothers. Let's go on to verse 57 now. The last verse in this chapter. The people of Shechem, let's read. All the evil of the men of Shechem did God render upon their heads, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. So the people of Shechem here, they aided Abimelech. They encouraged him. They encouraged him because they made him king after he killed his brothers. It was this reason that, as we see, God rendered upon their heads. He did this by allowing Abimelech to beat down and destroy the city and its inhabitants, by burning their stronghold. While all these men of the tower were in it, the verse continues, and upon them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. On both of them, Abimelech and Shechem. Shechem and Abimelech. They destroyed each other, just like Jotham had said they would. And all of this happened to Shechem as a result of the curse that Jotham had made. Take notice of something here. Something that I want to be clear with you. Yes, the destruction of Shechem was at the hand of Abimelech. But it was because God had judged them for what they had done. I want to thank you all for joining me here. I pray that the Lord blesses you. I pray that that you enjoyed today's sermon, that you got something out of it. You know, if you're a new viewer, once again, I want to thank you for joining me here. Looking at this timer on my screen, it looks like this is going to be a little bit longer again. I'm trying to cut these things down, but with Judges, it's going to be kind of hard. I'm working on Genesis, and I'm trying to cut it down, so you're going to see a lot of 2, 3, 4 parters. Again, thank you for joining me here. I want to again welcome the new followers, the new viewers. I pray you continue to follow us here. And please, if you, I say this to frequently, leave a comment below if there's something you would like me to answer. I can put that at the beginning of a sermon for you. Like, no guarantees, and you never know how long it might take me to research it. I always want to research it. I want to give you the best answers. Okay. So thank you for joining me here. I pray God blesses you and keeps you, and I'll see you all here next week. Oh, make sure to subscribe to this channel so that you catch these. Also, leave a like down below. Again, thank you for joining me here, and I pray God continues to bless you and keep you, and I'll see you here next week for an all-new Sermons in the Park. We'll be going into Judges chapter 10. So, thank you.